welcome back. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome. We are proud to be hosting and sponsoring CyberLogic Security webinar here, and I hope you'll get a lot out of it. This is the first of the 5 of training series that they'll be doing, and today Michael will be talking with you all about cyber security assessments and the importance of those. I just want to remind you, those of you who are already customers of us here at IA, if you hear anything during these talks that you're wondering if we're already doing for you, please reach out to your care manager and they'll be happy to go over your plans and let you know if we are covering these things. And if not, what we have in our stack that we can add to your existing agreement. And if not, if it's something that CyberLogic Security can help you with, they'd be more than happy to. So once again, thank you for joining. We'll be starting here in just a minute. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, Michael Lazar, one of the co-founders of CyberLogic Security. I'm here with my co-founder, Paz Terry, who's in the background, and we'll be looking and monitoring for any questions you have. So please feel free to ask them as we go along. We'll try to answer them as we're doing this. But in the event, and hopefully leave some time at the end to also go through questions as well. Just a reminder, as Sean mentioned, we have a series of these webinars coming up. So here's some of the dates and topics that will be at the same time as this one. And my understanding is if you've registered for this, you are already registered for the rest of them. So we hope to see you there. The easiest way to reach us would be info@cyberlogicsecurity.com. Send us an email. We will get back to you. So a little bit of a recap from our first seminar a couple of weeks ago. What does it take to get started a successful security program? We have here just a couple of key things that we think is very, very important for you and your organization to think about and to take care of. Number one is assess your current position. Where are we with cybersecurity? Talk to your provider, as Sean mentioned. If you're a client of IA, give them a call, ask if some of the things that we're talking about or going through, you're currently doing with them, or what it would take to do with them, or if there's something you would like to talk to us about, please reach out to us. Everything starts with a plan, right? I just can't say enough about it. So, write it down, and when you see it on paper and you start talking through it and seeing what the issues are and how you can overcome them, it starts becoming real. We also want to start with the policy. We actually have an upcoming seminar where we're dealing specifically with policies, and also we're providing some policy templates that you can use to get yourself started with it. But a great policy might be acceptable use case. What are employees allowed to do and not do? Remote access. Does everyone, who has VPN access, if you have VPN access? Those types of things are policies which, again, get written down and people have the opportunity to read them and understand them. The next two, they sometimes come across as a little soft or soft needs, but I can't say enough about this. The ownership of a company, the senior management of a company has to be involved with any type of cybersecurity initiative. And why? It's really simple. 9 times out of 10, implementing cybersecurity programs in your company will result in change. Sometimes the change can be minor in how you maybe get email. Sometimes it can be a major overhaul of how you access and provide your services, and how you interact with other companies. So it's important to have leadership there from the beginning, sponsoring this and making sure that, it's a known priority throughout the organization. So why care about cybersecurity? It's really hard to have a cybersecurity presentation without the scary slides. So this is one of those scary slides. This isn't meant to shock anyone. I hope people have seen some of these statistics before. But one of the most interesting things I hear all the time is companies going, well, I'm too small for a cyber attack. I'm not interested. I'm not interesting to the bad guys. And the truth is, it doesn't matter whether you think you're interesting or not. Many of these attacks are automated. And so they don't care if you're a small company or a big company. According to all the intelligence services that are out there, interestingly enough, although most companies think they're too small for a cyber attack or to be attacked directly, tracking from last year, 43% of all the cyber attacks out there were actually against small businesses, and 50% of them reporting suffering a loss because of these attacks. So you're not too small, and unfortunately, you are a target. Probably the scariest statistics here, the next one, is that when you're a small company, if you don't have good plans in place and good recovery procedures in place, unfortunately, 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack. They just can't recover. And again, some of these seminars, we're taking you through, and further discussions, hopefully with everyone, we have to make sure that, you're not one of those 60% if you ever are attacked or suffer a cybersecurity incident. A couple other things here. Over half of these attacks suffer, is something with a password. We'll talk a lot about passwords coming up in the next couple of slides after this. And then interesting statistic, 25% of small businesses don't realize that a cyber attack costs them money. It does to recover, whether it's notification, dealing with your insurance company, lost productivity. We'll talk more about these things. But the average for a small business to get back up and running is almost $1 million. And this is an average. Sometimes in these presentations, you'll see people say, the average cost of a breach is about $9 million. Well, that's for some of the bigger companies. So some are bigger, some are less. But we're talking about small companies. It's still a ton of money and going through it. And another statistic that I found interesting is that 91% of small businesses don't currently have cyber liability insurance. We're not an insurance company. We work with several of them. Integrated Access works with several of them as well. So if you don't, I strongly recommend you reach out and at least ask how to get started on that and take a look at it and see if it's right for your business. If you're working with computers, I would say it is all the time, but you still have to make that individual choice. So I mentioned it, small businesses frequently don't survive after, more than half after a breach. And they say, oh, I'm down for a couple of days. What was the big deal? Or, I have backups and can restore them. But a lot of it also is the reputational impact. If data is stolen from you, if your services are encrypted, if you have to send out letters to your customers saying you were breached and data was disclosed, it really takes a big hit on the company. And that's a huge part of this as well. The cost of the data breach isn't just necessarily IT time necessary to get it up and running, or your agreement with your IT provider. There could be legal fees, fines involved, depending on what business that you're in, right? Compensation for impacted customers. Nowadays, when data is leaked from one of your systems, you are required to provide things like credit monitoring insurance. And so it's embarrassing, plus there's actual really costs for it. So again, cybersecurity is very important to your business. And unfortunately, at some point, we're all going to be attacked. The question is, can we withstand the attack? And if we are hacked and compromised, can we recover? How fast can we recover? And how much can we minimize the damage that's going to happen? So again, talking about, some people think they're too big, some people think they're too small. Here's just a handful of recent breaches. Every single day, these happen to be in a single sector in retirement community services of companies that have been breached recently. You can see it ranges, from 528 people to the really bad one, where over 400,000 in 90 different sub-companies were compromised. That's that last one. It was a really large hack. And then, so imagine you have to, credit monitoring for 400,000 people, notices for 400,000 people, the reputational harm. These happen all the time. And it's a question of, how you can contain them and how you can respond to them. So a little bit of talking about this, how are these breaches happening? What's going on? Where's it all coming from? And the security professionals, many organizations contribute to what's called CVE, common vulnerabilities and exposure. Right. So this is a database where when good actors, bad actors, professionals, amateurs find problems with systems and software, they can submit a bug report or submit a security report, and it's investigated. And if it's deemed real enough, it makes it into a published list of what we call CVEs. To give you an idea, we're talking about 16,000 of them were published just last year. That's not counting the year before that. That's not counting this year. Keeping your systems up to date with the latest patches and having a good security program are key things to help you here. Assessments, which we're going to start talking about now, are a really good way to help organizations start the security journey. It's not a once and done type of activity. We'll talk a little bit about that again. Just think about it. If there's 16,000 new security problems found every year, it's not like you can do an assessment one time and you're done. It really is a continual process to keep you and your organization safe. So I use the word, so I think we should define it a bit. What are assessments? There's in the industry, there's a couple of different terms and terminology. Here are some generally accepted ones, right? So a security assessment is about evaluating the security system, looking for vulnerabilities, threats, and risks, right? It also can involve, we'll talk more about this, it can involve penetration testing, right? Or pen testing. Pen testing is taking it to the next step. One is scanning, but saying, hey, there's a known vulnerability. Pen testing is actually trying to take what you learn and break in, of course, with permission and all the proper documentation, to really find the vulnerabilities and what kind of damage can happen if you're compromised. It could be email takeover. It could be sending spam from email accounts, or it could be a lot worse, access to your financial systems, or if you work with other companies, access to other companies' systems through your systems. So we talk about assessments and pen testing. I use them a lot interchangeably, but the idea is that the results of whatever you're doing get fed back in to your IT organization, your outsource provider, your MSP, to figure out how to make things better and improve your security posture. So before we get a little more into it, how should assessments work? And I think this is an important thing to give you an idea of what's going on here. This is a story of a medium-sized financial company that hired an outside firm to perform security assessment. What was found was a known vulnerability, back to those CVEs we were just talking about. And the difference is, if you will, the good guys found it first before the hackers got there, because we were looking for it. The information was able to be fed back to the outsourced IT department, who was then able to make changes and close and fix that particular problem. After the IT department said, yes, it's been corrected, it was tested again to make sure it's actually closed. So again, you see a loop here that involves, the security consulting firm like us, your IT provider, could be integrated access, it could be your own IT department, right? Where it's going back and forth to make sure the vulnerability is identified, documented, closed, ultimately, improving your security. We're talking about assessments again. We said there's pen testing, there's security scanning, there's a whole bunch of different types of assessments. So this is an idea of the different types of assessments that could be valuable to your organization, maybe needed in your organization, or just a good idea going through it. So from vulnerability assessments we talked about, which is finding, penetration, actively trying to do things. Let's talk a little bit more about risk assessments, compliance assessments, and social engineering next. But it's not just one type of activity. I think it's a very important thing to understand. And so we talk about vulnerability and penetration testing. I won't talk about those again. What is risk assessment? Well, risk assessment is, a little bit different in that it's really taking a step back and evaluating what are the potential threats and vulnerabilities in an organization. What's also the potential damage that can be done? Sort of risk ranking items. For example, if you have a fire in your organization, is that a risk? Most likely. What does it do to your company? If you have a flood, if your shipping systems are encrypted and you can't get anything out the door to ship to your customers, maybe it's a big impact, maybe it's a little impact, even though it's an event. These type of assessments help you categorize what the impact of a particular event is going to be. And again, this is a big part of security planning and understanding not just what could happen, but what does it mean if it does happen, and what the appropriate response is. For a certain subset of customers, we have compliance assessments. So we've listed a few here, PCI, HIPAA, ISO 21000. It could also be for if you're in the defense industrial base, and those if you're a government contractor, especially working for the military. There are other requirements that are out there. There's CMMC that's coming online. There's NIST requirements if you're dealing with certain types of data. And so these assessments are a lot more detailed, focused around the compliance side of it, making sure that everything's there. It's a lot of documentation, and it's usually done, again, you do it not because you want to, you do it for compliance reasons. Social engineering assessment, we'll talk really briefly about here, but also going to be a topic of a training seminar, webinar that we're doing in a couple of weeks. And again, at the end of this, we'll list them out. So a lot of these organizations, a lot of activity happens, quite frankly, due to social engineering. It's not necessarily a component directly that is compromised, it's people. People are very important in the security process. And what you need to do is make sure that you're dealing and treating with the people, training them, educating them, making them, part of the security focus of your organization. It's not just sticking a new piece of equipment. So again, we'll talk a lot about the ongoing training, but you can have an assessment just to understand if you're vulnerable or not. And we had talked last week, and we'll say it again. If you reach out to us, we are giving away free automated training to organizations. So please reach out to us. It's one of those things where, again, you have to keep up with it. But if you don't have it, have never seen it, it can give your organization an idea and understanding and appreciation of where you currently are. Again, so it's info@CyberLogic Securities, and we'll have it again at the end to reach out to us somewhere. Right, so here, I gave you a story before how it's supposed to work. Here are real world examples of what's going on, right? Major retailer penetration test, involved, a weakness in their penetration in the payment system. I believe it was Target many, many years ago where, hackers got into the credit card systems. Rather embarrassing, very costly. An assessment found this for another retailer and fixed it before it caused any damage. Again, that's what these are for. These are getting, Paz mentioned a good analogy like a home inspection before you buy a house. This is also, preventative maintenance, going to the doctor, waiting until you've been breached to call a security firm, which we see all the time. Really difficult to help. Not impossible, really difficult. A compliance assessment, again, these are real, right? Insurance company underwent compliance assessment, problems were found, and these would have been very large fines associated with HIPAA violations if the data had been breached, found and closed. And then a financial institution, same thing, right? Several critical vulnerabilities in the customer network, misconfigurations, right? So now it's not about not following policies and procedures. It's not about weaknesses, it's about misconfigurations that could potentially lead to damage found and fixed. So there's real world benefits to this. This is a bit of a technical slide. This is a pretty information dense presentation. So anyone who wants a copy of the presentation, please just let us know, let IA know, happy to send it out. So I'm not gonna go through all of these. A lot of people think, oh, I have a firewall. Okay, or I have antivirus software on my system, so I don't need to be concerned anymore about security. And one of the things you really need to realize is that on your computer, there's an operating system, Windows usually, but Linux, Mac, what have you. And then there's these applications, Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, ERP systems, manufacturing systems. And those pieces of software themselves frequently have security issues. And these crop up because human beings are writing these software and mistakes get made. Maybe procedures weren't followed who's making it. But at the end of the day, it's vulnerabilities in your organization. We had one customer who they had really good security policies in plan. They had one piece of software that was left on with the default password. And that default password was used to compromise otherwise really good security. An assessment found it. Right. So find the weaknesses in your software or configurations again before the bad actors do. This is probably the only marketing slide / sales slide that's in here, but we strongly believe that a neutral third party needs to perform your assessments, not your internal department, not even your MSP. And the reason really is objectivity. There's no pet project, there's no pet software, there's no pet configuration. There's no, we need to let the CEO do whatever they want because of the CEO that, concern an objective third party. It's like, again, hey, this is what we found. And from your risk assessment, you can decide whether or not you want to bear that risk or deal with it by closing it off. Expertise. This is, very simply, this is what we do all day long, every day, security. There's lots of things to be done in the IT department, but we focus on one thing and one thing only. And in general, security companies will do that. We have access to the latest and greatest tools that sometimes can be very expensive or very difficult for organizations to implement on their own. And so by us bringing them in, you don't necessarily have to purchase them. They can be used for the assessments. No conflict of interest is a key one here, right? So we don't have an axe to grind one way or the other. We're trying to help companies stay safe, keep them out of the newspaper, keep them out from having a breach. Please don't misunderstand me. Internal teams and MSPs are super valuable. If you remember the model example, you find, as security consultants, we can help find the issues. We can give recommendations on how they need to be corrected and how they need to be fixed. We can validate that they've been fixed, but it's going to be your IT department or your MSPs that are actually doing the work. They're a critical part of the loop here. So one of the early statistics that 63% of breaches involve passwords, whether passwords get stolen or passwords are compromised. People tend to think, they hear things, oh, I've got to, I might be using a service. I might have encryption turned on for this. However, the reality is passwords are, again, the biggest single area of compromise. Some of them are, accidental, some are poor implementation, some of them because passwords get stolen in a breach. We'll talk about this in a second, what that means. We have another seminar that's coming up on using multi-factor authentication as a great way to backstop your passwords. Simply can't recommend it enough. It can be a little difficult when you first start to use it because it's new, but it's the same thing, quite frankly, if you're logging on to your bank, they're sending you a message, making sure it's you. Your computer systems and your email systems and all the other software you use should be subject to the same type of security to keep them safe. This is a fun slide because no matter how much we try to keep it up to date, it's wrong. So what you're seeing here is if you have an 8-character password, it's useless. 9, not so good. 10, maybe, depending on how it's configured. The problem is this is just a pure brute force attack. So you say, okay, I have 13 characters and it's numbers, uppercase, lowercase, and then symbols. 2 million years. I think I'm fine. That's if it was a straight brute force attack. What has happened is over the years, millions upon millions of passwords have been stolen and compromised on the internet. There's vast repositories of passwords. So as an example, instead of brute forcing, a password that maybe has uppercase and a number in it, there are lots of tools and techniques that say most people, not all, but most people will tend to capitalize the first letter and put the number at the end. Well, if you're doing that, you might have just taken 2 digits off of how strong your password is. So there are other attacks other than just brute force attacks that are very, very effective in getting through it. And keep in mind, say, a 7-month or a 10-character password as a retention time here. Talking about some very specific bad practices that we see when we do assessments. Reusing passwords. So every time I do this in a live audience, I stop and ask a question. How many of you out there are using the same password in more than one place? How many of you out there are using variations of the same password in multiple places? You add a number or a character, an exclamation, or an @ symbol to the same core password. Again, I mentioned those other techniques. Once they decipher a password, they'll start just adding on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'll start adding on special characters. And so the protection you think of, oh, they're slightly different, doesn't really help. So really important. If you haven't doing it, start doing it now. It can be a little bit of a pain, but start changing your passwords on all your sites. Every system that you interact with, whether it's Google, Instagram, Facebook, your network login, your VPN, your ERP system, right? Your manufacturing system, where maybe the password hasn't been changed in a decade. We see that a lot, unfortunately. It is time to change your passwords and keep them all separate. Really, really big tip here. It will help. This way, if one password is compromised, one system is compromised, not everything. And another thing that we see, using the same account for different actions. So for companies that have completely outsourced their IT department, sometimes you say, maybe there's one local administrator still at the company, still on staff, and they need administrative rights. Well, what we see happen more times than not, invariably, is that a user who has extra privileges, called privileged account administrator, they're logging in, they're doing the work, they're doing their day-to-day, but then someone asks them for help. Well, guess what? Now they log into the other system with the same account that they use for their day-to-day. And which, remember back on these password items that I was talking about, that password actually gets stored, even though it's encrypted, it gets stored on those other machines. And when that happens, it now becomes an attack point where if, again, I haven't changed my password too frequently, they might be able to, from another machine, get that password or get the hash, the encrypted value of the password, and go take it offline and decrypt it, and then, circle back around in 5 months or 3 months once they've broken the password. And now that machine, now that password is out there in the open, it's very hard to trace and track down, even with good logs. We're talking about that. So logging, audit trails, that's the other thing. If I'm going to do something, if I'm working in Word or PowerPoint or writing some software, I want to do that under a different privilege level than when I'm administrating my domain. Biggest reason is that, also accountability and audit trails. Hey, did I log in at 2 o'clock in the morning? No, I didn't. Right. So now we know we have a problem. Did my administrator account log in at 2 o'clock in the morning? Oh, yeah, I did. I got a phone call. I had to go do something for someone and I used it. So this takes, again, talking about changing the way you work and getting executive buy-in. This can be a big one, but it's really important, is stop using privileged accounts for regular day-to-day work. It's been actually a known thing in the computer industry for probably 30 years. But it's gotten very easy to get very lazy about this, and it leads to real problems. Yeah. Similar to this, one of the things that we see a lot, especially in smaller businesses, is what's called local administrator rights. Now, this is, again, regular user, you need to install a software update for something that's installed in your system, or, you need to install new software. And the system may prompt you, you want to go as administrator, you click yes, and the software is there. The challenge is that local administrator account on that particular machine has extra rights. And again, that password's now there, it's sitting there. It can be stolen and cracked and hacked offline for them to come back to it. You really open up the attack surface, because once someone can get into as a local administrator to a machine, if that machine happens to be on a domain or up in the cloud with Azure or Google, you can start using that extra permissions to start learning more and more about the environment. It's just that simple. So we recommend not having any local administrator rights, which could be, difficult for some companies because again, they have to change how they work and they might have to put in a help desk ticket or use a piece of software to elevate the privileges temporarily, called privilege access management, to install it. But again, it goes back to the similar screen of not using the same account everywhere and really locking down and controlling rights. It's really important to understand by removing local administrator rights and using different accounts for privilege levels activities and administrative level activities. Studies have shown it reduces what's called your attack surface or your vulnerability to a lot of the published CVEs that we talked about by over 80%. So let me say that again, even without a security policy, even without great firewalls, and even without great, antivirus software and great systems, simply removing all of your privileged, removing and controlling your privileged accounts and local administrator rights really makes a big difference in the security posture. It also means making a difference in how you work because you want to go install Notepad++, you can't, right? You have to make it, you have to stop, get your privileges elevated or put in a help desk ticket to do so. So that's the trade-off, but it's a worthwhile trade-off when you think it through. So any questions that we do?
I had a great question about the automated assessments. So I had kind of answered that in chat, but basically just how we use them, we're for them, so they can't do any type of assessment done.
Sure. So good question on, there's automated assessments, there's manual assessments we can call pen testing, there's hybrid versions of it. Automating testing is good, especially for an external pen test. They're generally pretty simple and straightforward. The automated tests to me make you feel good, but you're not necessarily sure that you're secure. And being very specific, where someone can come in, do an automated assessment test, and maybe the firewall stops it. So you think, oh, I'm good, right? Or someone comes in and maybe your antivirus software or variations of antivirus flag it and go, hey, this is unusual activity, and stops it. Those are great. But what happens if you get a crafty hacker, someone who's managed to compromise your password or just managed to compromise your systems, and they're in there? What can they do? And we find all sorts of things that they can do, once they get past that one hurdle. So maybe your system sent an alert, maybe it sent an alarm, this is unusual activity. Maybe it got missed, but now they're still in their system doing a lot of different things. These types of deeper assessments, hands-on, really going through system by system in the environment, find that next layer of defense and help you strengthen it. So I would always say, we recommend both. They're both useful in different scenarios.
Thank you.
This one again is very much a technical slide, but there's a process that's called hardening workstations. And this is something where, do you really need the Xbox application on your corporate computer, right? Do you need Microsoft? That's a bad example, maybe do that, the other one. But I'll use the Xbox, add-ons that are present in Windows 10 and Windows 11, right? So they make that Windows software to run everywhere and do everything. So think of this as customizing your solution to harden it, to whether, remove options. So don't let the computer talk to really old versions of Windows is a simple example. That's an example of hardening something, right? Compliance, if you, again, going back to compliance, if you're one of those industries that have regulations, you might actually need to do certain things in order to maintain compliance on your system, right? And again, if you're reducing if you're removing local administrator, restricting, yourself to only use non-privileged accounts when you're an administrator and using administrator accounts for just administrative things, and you harden your workstations. And a lot of these are just, their settings changes, removing unnecessary programs, understanding what's on that system. You will, again, really improve your security posture. And assessments will help show this because they'll show, hey, as an example, here are 50 things you might want to think about changing on your workstations or on your servers because they're compromising your security. And going back to the first slide that we talked about, Make a plan and assess risk. You may say, that's fine, I don't care, that's not important to our business. Or you may say, oh, that's interesting, I didn't think about that, and we have to deal with it. And again, this goes back to the whole cycle of, security consultants interacting with business owners, interacting with your IT/outsource/managed service provider to get to the most secure environment possible. So another bad practice that we see out there that come out of assessments is forgetting to patch. This is frequently in the news. As a matter of fact, just in the last couple of days, there's been a lot of security related news about very bad vulnerability that's letting bad actors take over complete systems pretty easily. The software in question, the system in question, the patch was actually released for this vulnerability 2 years ago. You have major companies, organizations, not just small companies, but medium-sized companies, big companies that aren't patching everything. So people think, oh, I patch Windows, I run Windows Update, I'm good. What about, do you have Adobe products on there? Are the Adobe products getting patched? All right, and so on and so forth. Pretty much everyone nowadays has mobile phones and mobile devices that are accessing, if nothing else, email. Right, so getting your email on your phone, very useful. Are those mobile devices being kept up to date with all the latest software patches? Would you want a phone that's 5 years old that has known security vulnerabilities, can be completely taken over with sending just a text message to it, getting access to, and that's a real vulnerability, by the way, that now has complete access to your email system. And every time that person is typing in a password or looking at a contact or reading email, so are the bad guys. So don't forget about these mobile devices. They need patch management as well. And it's not easy because it's not necessarily the company's phone. So this goes back to policies. Do you want to provide company phones? Do you want to tell employees if they want to access it with their personal devices, there's rules they have to follow? And that goes back to policies and procedures, which again, we'll be talking about in future meetings. This again is just, going through here, routers, switches, firewalls. Can't tell you how many times we see in environments where the software is out of date on a switch and is causing a security problem or a technical problem. And the patch was released years ago because many times people don't think about upgrading or patching switches. Right? It's just sort of, it's there, it's working, you forget about it. It's just, connects two wires together. Access points for wireless that have vulnerabilities where someone could just sit down, put out a little Pringles can, listen to your Wi-Fi signal, and start reading your information. It can be decrypted. These are actual vulnerabilities. Patches are available for it. Are you patched? And again, if you're a customer, you can reach out to your care manager. I'm sure the answer is yes. But if not, or if you're doing this yourself, please don't forget these things. And then there's all the other things that are out there, your web servers. Right, so you set up a little internal web application, or maybe it's your publicly facing web, and you think there's nothing on there that's really important. Well, what if it's defaced? What's the reputational harm? What if when you were building it, someone left a old administrator password that hasn't been changed, password for use again, sitting in a text file or sitting, in a configuration file on that publicly facing web server? Now all of a sudden, even though that device itself wasn't important, it could be allowing access into your environment. When it comes to programming itself, we have Java, .NET. You're talking about programming languages. One of the other type of assessments that can be done and are important to do is code assessments. So by reviewing not just the software, how it functions, reviewing how the software itself was written. This is done by security experts who can use automated tools, but also best practices to look at what is going on with the actual application. And doing it, and the coding style. The question
about patching came in. Do I need an IT person or company to do patching, or is that something I can manage from my company?
It depends on the complexity of the company, what type of technology you have that's in there. Making sure that the technology that you even have in there is still patchable. Meaning, many companies, especially if it's more consumer space. Equipment, they've abandoned patching these things, even though sometimes there's known vulnerabilities. But it's a great question. But as please reach out to us. We're happy to jump on the phone and discuss it with you, because if it's a certain, small enough, manageable enough, and you have a good handle on it, very possibly. If it's larger, you got remote users, complex systems, it may be best off to be left to another company to handle it for you.
Maybe on like a quarterly basis and monthly basis.
Yeah, so the patching doesn't necessarily get done that's a really good question. So we talk about patching and everything that's on here. You don't necessarily patch your systems every single day. There's usually a cycle, and this also goes to testing, making sure that that patch doesn't break anything. I forget the date, but there was recently a patch for Microsoft Exchange that went out and had really good security patches, made sure people were nice and safe. But it caused email to go down. So it strengthened security, but as a byproduct, it broke email. Not great. So part about the patching is, you don't want to just apply these things blindly. You need to test them, right? And so you need to have an area to test them. You need to know how to test them, which again, could be a great reason why you might want another company to do it for you. And the company that specializes in that. That's a really good question. We see this all the time, talking about cloud services. In our first presentation, we had one slide, don't forget the cloud. Cannot tell you how many times we see, companies that have embraced the cloud for for big things, little things, which is wonderful, lots of good reasons to do it. But then they think, oh, I don't have to worry about security. The cloud vendor is taking care of it. And the answer is no, they're not. That's not their job. The same way they're generally not making backups for you, right? So if you have a server that's up there in the cloud, you just think, yes, maybe it's 4 nines reliable, but when something happens to it, the cloud company goes, right? That's not what they're there to do. They're providing a platform. So don't forget, know where all of your technical pieces are and what they're doing, and make sure that they're also being kept up to date and going through it. So another one we've seen with backups, backups come in, they work, right? So hopefully everyone knows to test their backups. So every now and then it's not making a backup, it's restoring data that's important. So actually go through, and we'll be talking about this again in another seminar, you got to test these things. But we've seen before where backup solutions haven't been patched and there's a critical vulnerability in them. And then what happens is the bad guys come in, the first thing they do is they attack your backups. And then they attack your systems, because most people would simply go, oh, I'll just go to my backups. I make them every day. Yes, it would be really terrible if I lost a day's worth of data, but okay, that's the alternative to being out of business. Then they go to look at their backups and their backups are not there anymore or damaged. And so again, you're dealing with crafty, malicious actors out there. They know what they're doing. Many companies have access to integration with third-party systems. So maybe you're using Salesforce and you have single sign-on enabled, where you come in your computer, you log in, and then boom, you're right into Salesforce, right? So that's called single sign-on as an example. Making sure those are all up to date and kept up to date is critical. But using Salesforce, as an example, they'll issue updates every now and then saying, hey, we're about to change this method of working. Make sure you're okay with it. But they push that back on you, the user, or your IT provider to make sure things are okay with it. Antivirus, I think this is a simple one to say. Make sure your antivirus or security solution is always up to date with the latest. We've seen where people had a subscription and they were paying money for it, and then they just, well, we haven't had a problem, so we let it expire. And so now they're not getting updates. And now going back to those 16,000 vulnerabilities that were reported last year, maybe one of them now is applicable on your system, and your antivirus system simply can't find it or discover it. And the last one I want to talk, so again, websites we talked about a little bit, but the other one that frequently gets overlooked, and this is really applicable if you're mostly if you have storage on site. People forget where all that, you have years worth of business data, years worth of company information, content, business records, you name it, and it's sitting on, we call it a network attached storage device or, storage area network. Those are computer systems. They have operating systems. They have ROMs, BIOSes and firmware that need to be patched and updated for the exact same reason. Some could be performance. Some could be so, that a vulnerability that got discovered doesn't let someone come in who, in other words, may not be able to get to any other system, but they get to your storage system and they can maybe copy the data or erase the data, or do both, copy the data and then blackmail you for it. So all these things have to be kept in mind. This is not even a comprehensive list. This is the top 15 I can think of just sitting down on. And most environments probably have more than this. I'm going through it. So again, just a reminder, I mentioned we have a couple more of these coming along. Paz and I will be taking turns on who gets to go in front of the camera because we both like it so much. So the next one is on February 22nd. And Paz will be talking about documentations, policies, and procedures. So some of these things where I said, well, risk categorization, what does that look like? What does a policy look like? What is it designed to do? It may be considered in some way, this is a very more dense technical presentation. That one's going to be a lot on focusing on policies, procedures, documentation. But again, if you attend afterwards, we're able to send out samples of some templates. And of course, we're available to help you if you like. March 8th is going to be MFA. We talked about passwords. There's a lot of confusion and sometimes frustration on MFA. It's getting better and better and easier to implement. But we're going to go through a whole, a whole webinar on MFA, when to use it, how to use it, the benefits provide, some of the options that are out there. On the 22nd, is going to be a fun one. We talked about the social engineering earlier before. So now we're talking about security awareness and training. And again, this is the type of training we're giving away for free if people are interested for a couple of weeks. To give you an idea of it, this is where you start getting an idea of how your people, your resources, you might say the weakest link in the organization. What's their understanding of security? What, can they benefit from training? Do they need additional training? So that's phishing, clicking on bad email links, or, social engineering. Someone calls and says, hey, in a larger company, I'm the CEO and I need something from you right now. And it's a bigger company. You don't know the CEO. Why is the CEO calling me? Okay, I'll do whatever the CEO says. That's a social engineering campaign, or maybe sending a bad email from the CEO's compromised email box to the controller to say, hey, go wire this money. It's urgent. It's immediate. These are all real things that actually happen. They're not hypotheticals. They're real. So the security awareness and training one, I think, is a great one to sit in on and learn about, and also just make sure you're performing security and training. And finally, the last one, we're going to wrap up this, is business continuity and disaster recovery planning. We talked about policies, procedures. We're talking about training. Well, this is where it all starts really coming together. You have your policies, you have your procedures. What are you going to do when something happens? Something can be a cyber incident. Right? You've been attacked, you've been hacked, you've been, encrypted. It could be your business burnt down with a fire. The time to think about what to do is not when it's happening. The other example, I had someone, we had a customer who they had a business continuity and disaster recovery plan, which was a good plan. And I said, okay, show it to me. And they went on their computer. I said, no, your computer's encrypted. Show it to me. Well, it's over here on the file server. No, your file server is encrypted. Well, how do I get to it? That's a really good question. Why didn't you print it out and have it somewhere? Why didn't you have a copy at home? So you know who to call, when to call them. What's that phone tree look like? Who gets involved from the lawyers? Who gets involved from insurance? Who gets involved from your IT company? So this is a really, probably one of the most critical pieces. You got to have your policy and procedures so everyone know what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. But this is finally taking all that, putting it together, documenting it, so everyone knows what to do when there's an issue. So I really hope you'll join us for these upcoming seminars. Again, please reach out to us at info@CyberLogicSecurity. If you have any questions, as we've mentioned before, again, we are offering some free training. We're also offering a free consultation with us, usually, for about an hour, try to understand if you have any questions, ask a chief information security officer or ask a chief security officer type of question. Should I be doing this? What do you think? For instance, that patching question, whoever asked it, I would strongly encourage, reach out. We'll have a conversation with you. It's just getting to know you and getting to know us. So we look forward to it. So at this point, we have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to open it to any and all questions. Any questions coming in?
Nothing else is coming in right now. I mean, you can talk about the average cost of these things, the cost range vary wildly from size.
Well, yeah, so assessments are really dependent on, so the question was, what's the cost for an assessment? What do they look like? It's a wild range because it depends on complexity and size. So a PCI for credit card processing audit or assessment is significantly less than an active pen testing exercise. We're looking at, your internal systems and software, which is, again, less expensive than say maybe reviewing if you write software for a living, reviewing your software, which is far more of an intimate and extensive assessment. So they range. I mean, some of them are, under $1,000 for something like a PCI, if you're just taking a simple credit card and it's paperwork, and they can easily go, I'd say, north of 50, north of 100, but it really depends on under $1,000. So it's a huge range, but please don't not ask the question if you think you might need one, because, with a couple of questions, we can determine sort of what range or narrow it down much quicker for you. But if you're not doing these, I really encourage you to do them.
Another question came in. What are the next steps following assessment? Will we get a roadmap on what to work on? And we didn't talk about this specifically, but your assessment should have deliverables with some mitigation efforts.
Yes, it's a great question. So the question is, what's the next step after an assessment? So if you remember a few slides ago, I won't go back to it, but there's sort of that model assessment cycle. So the output of an assessment is actually documentation and plan and information. So what will typically happen is if a critical vulnerability is found, like, hey, we've got your passwords right here. Even in the middle of the assessment, people get notified to start changing them and doing it. But assuming, things go normally, at the end of an assessment, documentation is written with all the findings, categorization, classification of the issues that are found, remediation steps, like, okay, you can actually go here and do this to fix it, which generally we provide to, the IT organization, whether it's internal or whether it's the, if it's an outsourced one. So it's not just, oh, you have a problem. It's, you have a problem, here's where it falls into, sort of the severity level, as we understand it, and then here's how to fix it. And then the key thing after these assessments is, once everyone believes that they're been fixed, you do it again and try to verify that that vulnerability is corrected, and in implementing it didn't make another problem. So, clear deliverables, clear information, clear next steps on what to do in working with your IT organization or outsourced IT organization.
Another great question came in that I did answer, but it just says, how often should my small business have an assessment done? So I just said at minimum annually, but it just depends on the reliance on technology, how your architecture, the network, and what other things.
Yeah, so the question, in case everyone couldn't hear it, was how frequently should we be doing assessments? The absolute bare minimum is once a year, but the reality is with software changing, every month there's patches from Microsoft, good patches, needed patches, please, they're critical to install. That possibly opens up other issues. So sometimes you've secured something and then a patch comes along the way, and in its applying the software update, it reverts the setting. So I mean, for me, once a year is the absolute minimum, twice a year is recommended, once a quarter. And again, this is where you can supplement the automated testing with manual testing. So the more extensive maybe gets done once, twice a year, and the automated testing, quite frankly, might be able to run monthly. In the background, it just kicks out a simple report, so you can know that the perimeter is still good. The inside hasn't found anything too severe, and there's lots of ways of doing it and configuring it.
Next question is, how long do assessments take?
Size dependent. So, a simple outside penetration test is going to take, well under a day. It might take a day to pull the documentation together and do it. An internal pen test is usually anywhere from 3 days to a week. In doing for most environments, small, medium, obviously it's a larger environment. Code reviews can take a couple of weeks because that's when we're actually looking at the software that's being written itself and understanding it. And then one thing, I mentioned about software vulnerabilities, API testing also takes, this is when maybe you have a web service that's up on, available to your customers or to your clients. or to your partners that they interact with you. Again, that's, 3 to 5 days, sometimes up to 2 weeks. That's on the outside. And a lot of that time is actually involved in writing the reports. So there's an active phase of compromising the systems or seeing them, make sure we searched everything. And then there's, okay, got to pull this data again back into a report that is actionable, to make a difference for an organization. So I hope that answers the question, but it's, day to 2 weeks, day to week, a day to week is much more typical.
So we'll make this the last question, and it's a doozy. How do you go about assessing your recovery time, your RTO and RPO? Is that something better handled in the DR?
Yeah. So one of the risks. So if you're doing a risk assessment, talk about types of assessments, you'll say one of the risks that will come up is what's our time to recover? What's our objective to recover? There's acronyms for this: RTO, RPO. But the assessment is, we don't know if we have any, so as a risk assessment, we don't know how long it will take to recover, right? It might be the outcome of it. And then you go, we need to understand that. We need to understand if we can be down for a day, 2 days, 4 days, a week. What do we do with that? The action item about that will get dealt with when you have done your policies, procedures, and constructed, your disaster recovery document and your incident response plan. And again, that's our last, I believe that's the last webinar on this, but that's where you sit down and you work through, right? So you may say, look, I can't afford to be down for more than a day, 1 business day, so I don't care about weekends. And then you realize in order to meet that objective, you have to change a lot of things to get there. Right? And so then you go back to the planning of it and the implementation of it. And most importantly, and we'll talk about this during the DR phase, disaster recovery, these plans have to be tested. Right? So the same way the assessment doesn't go and get put on a shelf, it's given to your IT organization. These disaster recovery and contingency plans actually should be tested at least, again, once a year, but more likely twice a year, where it was called a tabletop exercise. You come in, you sit around a room, and someone says, okay, we've just been encrypted, or the cloud is down and we can't get to our shipping systems. What do we do? So some of these are minor problems. Some of these are bigger problems. What if someone's hacked your building control system? Actually, had this one come up. Someone hacked the building control system. No one had a physical key because they hadn't needed one in years. So, now you're talking about getting a locksmith, what's going on? Why is it happening? So all those angles are ideally covered in these plans. And then you, again, determine acceptable risk, and you put a plan in place to deal with it, and then you test the plan. Was that the last question?
Good.
Thanks. We actually managed to not go over today. So thank you everyone very much for joining. I hope you found this useful. Again, info at Cybersecurity, contact us if you'd like. Happy to send out the presentation as well, and look forward to seeing everyone on the additional webinars. Thank you and have a great day.